Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention. Maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. Hey everybody, welcome back. Another quick intro here for you. Another episode of the podcast that I spun around fairly quickly. I had a really good chat with my guest today, Tamie Sue Stuttle of Real Women in Trucking, about issues near and dear to female truckers in America. Though the conversation covered a whole lot of issues that are, important to all truck drivers. There's been the cancellation of a study that was looking into sexual abuse and sexual harassment of female truckers out there. And the cancellation of that study, I think, was done very cynically because it would have shown that one of the major problems with truck driver training in America is the team training model, which our good friends at the American Trucking Association's major membership rely on to a great extent in order to keep the driver churn problem going and throw more bodies into an industry that they refuse to otherwise fix. So Tamie and I had a really substantial chat about this and a bunch of other issues. I think you guys are going to enjoy it. A whole bunch of links and information down in the show notes. Go check all that stuff out. Go follow Tamie on Twitter. Go follow the rest of her comrades at Real Women in Trucking. And pay close attention. There's lots going on here. Thanks for listening. Book is almost done. Last chapter will be being submitted tonight or tomorrow. And then some editing on the manuscript for a couple of weeks. And more news on that very, very soon. Questions, comments, suggestions, corrections, and hate mail, as always, send them to me, gordylocks@protonmail.com. If you are listening to this on some podcasting platform which is not Substack, head on over to my Substack, autonomoustruckers.substack.com. Smash that subscribe button. All of my work and podcasts will show up directly in your inbox. You don't even have to keep up with me. It'll just show right up there for free. If you are a person of means and you value my work, consider a paid subscription. Help me keep the lights on around here. All right, everybody, let's get to Tamie Sue Stuttle and Real Women in Trucking. All right, g'day, everybody. Welcome back to another fantastic episode of the Voice of Gord podcast. I'm Gord, and this is my voice. The other voice you're about to hear today is that of a young lady I've been meaning to get on the show for a while, or at very least someone from her organization who does some pretty good work out there in the universe of trucking. Ms. Tamie Sue Stuttle from Real Women in Trucking is going to join the show today, and we're going to talk about some issues near and dear. A particular issue of great import to female truck drivers that does not get near enough the attention that it deserves and connects with so many others in our industry. Please welcome to the show, Tamie Sue Stuttle.
Glad to be here, Gord. It's love to talk about the issues that we are dealing with in our industry recently, especially the new FMCSA guidelines and Real Women in Trucking.
Yeah, 2025 has been quite the year. I've been in the middle of working on a book about the fate of the North American truck driver, and I started that book project. Well, I guess it's sort of been ongoing. I started my Substack a few years ago, and I've been writing about trucking for longer than that, and this publishing company approached me and in November, and what a year. It's just like every single week, some new thing comes up. It's just like, all of the problems with trucking are, as a friend of mine described it, escaping the containment zone of sort of trucking media and us talking amongst ourselves. And there's plenty to talk about. So for my guests who might not know who you are, could you introduce yourself? Tell us how you got into trucking, what's your relationship to it, and then maybe a little bit about Real Women in Trucking and what they do.
So my background is in insurance. I owned an insurance agency and real estate. And when my kids flew the nest, I had children all over the continental United States, which was really hard for a mom. And so I got into trucking to give me a way to travel across the US and get paid for it. I am definitely a transient. I love driving. I love being in the truck. I love the lifestyle. When I got into trucking, my first couple months, I met Desiree. I actually was going through the Get Your CDL program with Rail, and I had some concerns about how women were handled from the company perspective, and I reached out to Desiree in reference to that because the trucking industry, when you come from other industries, the stigma in trucking is so different. Women are treated and handled in a much different way in trucking. So that led me to become a mentor and trainer. And so I mentored women in all aspects and new trainees as well as existing drivers who were having problems or situations, sexual assault, sexual abuse, problems at home. Maybe they were, I had one that was in a tornado. So I mentored. I then went on to dive into my own experience as an owner operator. And Desiree reached out to me, asked me if I'd be interested to be on the board of Real Women in Trucking. So I was like, absolutely. I'd love to be on the front lines of this. Sexual abuse and sexual assault is something that's near and dear to my heart. I've been advocating for it my entire life. And Real Women in Trucking is the place to do that. It's an advocacy association. What I like about it is it's not just somebody sitting in a cubicle with no experience in the trucking industry. Real Women in Trucking is real drivers dealing with real issues. So we are out here with you. We know what's going on. We are not blind to it. So that is a summary, I guess you would say, of my introduction to trucking and my role. As a board member, I do a lot with marketing. So I am the director of marketing. And I help Desiree with a lot of issues. I'm on the Transportation Research Board for National Institutes. I reach out to our Congress, our senators, our House, our associations with issues. I have a podcast, Trucking with Tamie, which I have not been on for a little bit.
Yeah, I feel you on the not getting to the podcast. Sometimes life gets busy. Mine is by no means regular. I put them out when I have time, sometimes when I feel like it. Sometimes I have 5 or 6 of them backlogged I haven't edited yet. And sometimes I get them turned around same day, depending on import of issue and how much time I have any given day to the next. I've met some of your folks from Real Women in Trucking, especially at Matt's, Desiree, Michelle, Jess, all good folks. The sexual assault thing, I mean, it's a hard subject for folks to tackle. Lots of people would rather not discuss it just because of the sort of negativity around it, and it's a bad thing, right?
Exactly.
You would think that a job, so not roughly 95% of truck drivers are men and 5% are women. That fluctuates sometimes, but I think that's generally true. And a lot of the women in trucking, but not all, run team with their husbands. And there are a small number of solo female truckers out there, many of whom are part of your organization. And what a lot of people don't know about, although it's been highlighted in a number of news articles over the years, especially at NPR. Usually I don't have too much time for those guys, but they get this right once in a while. This idea of training other drivers via running team, right? So for those listening to this who are not truckers, running team is a sort of American term. In Australia, they call it two up. In other parts of the world, it's illegal. I know it's illegal in Europe. You'll have one driver driving the truck, and one driver sleeping. Our friends within the mega carriers in the United States trucking industry have decided that this is a modality of training that they can take a fresh driver just right out of CDL school And we all know those are bad, and the training is less than ideal, less than thorough, and actually doesn't prepare you for anything, near as I can tell. There are very few truck driving schools, so I wouldn't throw off a bridge. And then they take you from them and stick you in a truck with another person for a number of weeks or months. And oftentimes they put a male and a female who don't know each other inside a little box called a truck with a little bunk on the back that you have to share to sleep in. And then while one person is sleeping, they're also somehow training you at the same time. We all know it's fraudulent. We all know it's bad. We all know that that's not how you're supposed to be trained. We all know it's happening, yet it remains legal and is also the site of a great deal of the sexual assault that you guys talk about. Am I right about this?
You are completely right. The problem is that they find it putting women in this environment with male trainers. I call students mile mules. So these trainers generally don't have a lot of experience themselves with some of these companies. And they are paid by the mile. They actually take a cut in pay to be a trainer as far as their per mile pay is. And then they get paid for their miles plus the student's miles. So the more miles that the student drives and they drive, the bigger their paychecks. So a lot of these trainers use these students as mile mules. They don't teach them how to back. They don't teach them the rules of the road. They don't teach them how to slide their tandems. They just use them for miles.
That's incredible. I didn't know that part, which presents a sort of incentive hazard where you're actually not incentivized to train because you just want them to keep going.
Correct. Correct. I have ran into lots of incidences where students, were used as these mile mules. And then when they got out on the road, they had none of the skills that they needed to survive. And that's setting them up for failure. On top of that, you're stuck in this little cab with someone. And, it's very hard to be put in that situation where, especially with males and females, where there might be an attraction or there might be a need that somebody wants to push, and there's not consent. And it's an uncomfortable situation. And then if that is not shared, what do? You're stuck in a cab. There's a lot of confrontations. There's a lot of uncomfortable situations. There's women that get left stranded, because of them saying no.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing with running teams. So let's back up a little bit. I mean, do we know how to back up? You know how to back up? I know how to back up. Our trainee doesn't. So let's back up. Let's practice backing up. Running team is awkward enough to begin with, never mind the gender difference or any weirdness downstream of that, right? Like you're sharing this tiny space with another human being and it's small. It's like driver's seat, passenger seat, bunk. Some of the bigger bunks, like a studio sleeper, will have a fold down bunk. There's two beds. You each get your own bed. Some don't. And, it's actually hard to maintain a well-functioning operating team, even if it's just two dudes or two women, because you have to get along with another person. You have to sort of have similar hygiene standards, maybe taste in music if you're listening to stuff going down the road. You also have to have the personality that can sort of roll with another person who you might not click with.
The temperature, like hot and cold, you have to be on the same page on what temperature is comfortable. That's a huge one, even for couples.
Oh yeah. No, I mean I get that just living with my wife, right? Like we have a small house and I prefer in the winter that it stay about 67, 68, and she wants it to be 74. And I'm like, we're burning through more propane and wood when we do that. We just put on a sweater. But yeah, no, when you're in a truck, the whole thing is difficult. There are teams that make it work. This is why like a husband and wife team operation is worth its weight in gold. They already get along. They're already used to living together. Put them in a truck and they will go down the road and make tons and tons of money. But putting two other people together who don't already have that pre-existing relationship, it's awkward and it's difficult. And then you layer on a couple of other dynamics with the team training thing, especially for women. So you have the power imbalance in between the trainer, who is kind of going to be signing off on you, right? Like if you don't impress your trainer enough, you might not pass forward through your training and get to the next stage where they turn you loose out on the road.
Absolutely.
You also have the like, there could be like a physical size thing of like an imposition or a perception of, like, oh, this person scares me or whatever. Then
Intimidation.
intimidation. There's the psychological component. And then we have this problem where humans are humans, and you put a man and a woman together in a small spot where they can't escape one another, and it is bound to cause problems. And just imagine if you're a person who's not a trucker, that you're brand new to the industry, you've just got your license, and now you're being told that you have to spend weeks at a time in a truck with some stranger you don't even know in order to like get your license and advance in your career. And it doesn't have to be this way, right? Like, I was not trained that way. A lot of truck drivers are not trained this way. But the mega carriers, or at least many of them, use this particular method of training people because it's cheap, it makes them money, and who cares if people wash out? We'll just go get somebody else from our government subsidized truck driving school, right? Like, the whole system just screams bad to me.
A lot of people were like, well, we want same-sex training. That's going to eliminate it. But in 2014, there was a federal ruling that said, oh, that's unconstitutional. We can't do that, right? That's a violation of the Civil Rights Act. So now we're in the situation where some women are like, okay, I'm comfortable. I'm good. I can take care of myself, right? I can handle.
Hold on. Can we back up one more time? We're training, right? We're going to back up the truck.
Mm-hmm.
So 2014,
mm-hmm.
There's a ruling that says same-sex segregated truck driver training was unconstitutional. Can you talk about that case a little bit? Like, what?
So in 2014, a federal ruling, now this is federal, this wasn't state, established that same-sex training violates Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. So they're saying it's sex discrimination and it will delay training for women drivers. So, you're stuck in a pickle, right? So.
Wow, that's crazy, because like typically we associate such court rulings and such concerns to be like discrimination in places where like that word has some meaning and the discrimination is obvious. But this is accommodation. This is saying that like in female truck driver training, if you want to train with another woman because that's just how you want it done, that desire for that accommodation violates Title VII. Is that what that court decision said?
Yeah, so it's saying that by having same-sex training, you're limiting the employment opportunities and you're delaying training. So what happens, and this is still common today because there are some companies that still prefer same-sex training. But what happens is for women, there's not enough women trainers. So then students are left sitting, waiting, so they're delayed, right? So that's limiting their employment. And that was the ruling of that 2014 ruling.
All right, I want to inject something in here, right?
Okay.
They are okay. I want to break this down because I think there's some propaganda going on here, not on your part, but on the fact they're not talking about other options, right? So They're saying that there is not enough female trained truck drivers that are trainers, and that might very well be correct, right? I'm not going to dispute that. But the model where you are sitting in a truck with somebody else out on the road in training, this is the rub here, right? This is the nuance. If you are a female trainee and you're driving around in a day cab all day and going home at the end of the day as part of your training, that's a whole different ballgame. And I would bet that there would be a lot more women drivers or potential trainee drivers who would be happy to share a cab with a guy learning how to drive truck if it was like a 10 or 12-hour shift, and at the end of the day, they went home and they didn't have to live with the dude, right? Like, do I have this correct?
You do, absolutely. If companies would adjust their training module to something like that, the problem is in not all areas is freight going to support that.
I believe it is. I just think that our entire model is built around like expecting the OTR long haul guys to do all the loading and unloading, right? So I worked for a company in Canada. When I was trained, I worked for a company in Canada that had a whole crew of local guys that would go pick up all the loads around Hamilton, Toronto, London, the whole greater Toronto area, bring them back to our yard in Hamilton, chain them down, tarp them, do all the stuff, get them ready. And then the highway guys, the OTR guys, would come bang onto a trailer and drive away. And when they came back from Chicago or New Jersey or wherever they went and they brought the loads back, they dropped the trailer in the yard. And we had 10, 12 guys that would do all the local work for them. That system is possible. It's just it's expensive because now you have to pay the local guys. And the trucking, the megas, the bigger fleets don't want to do that. They are just being cheap bastards and they expect the OTR guys to do all of that stuff inside of what they're doing already, which then reduces the opportunity for training in a more humane local capacity.
This way. So you take that female student, you put her over the road, you give her a reduced rate of pay, right, for the miles she's doing. She's living in the truck, so you're not paying for a hotel, right? You're not paying any per diem. So flip that. You send that same female driver with a day cab, right, for the day. You are paying her that rate, plus you're paying her hotel on top of it. Plus you're going to have to pay that guy more. So yeah, it's definitely from a cost-effective approach. OTR guys, they can save a lot more money going that route than they can with, and then you think about how much time they sit in the docks, loading, unloading. They can also use them for team loads, right? At a reduced rate because they're not paying the student the full amount that a team would make. Even with the trainer reduced pay per mile, they're making out because they're getting, a team load ran for a fraction of what they would pay an actual team.
Right. Yeah. So there's this financial incentive, which leads them to engage in this like serious moral hazard, again, of putting a female and a male in a truck together with all these power imbalances and psychological considerations, and they just do it anyway. So now that we have the sort of table set for that, maybe tell me and my audience, like, how often does this team trainer male female situation actually lead to sexual assault, women being dropped off in the middle of nowhere because for whatever reason? Like how much of this, how big is this problem and how often does it take place?
So I'm going to throw you out some statistics that I've been given from different resources. One, Global Trade Magazine published last year that 92% of women face some kind of sexual harassment or sexual abuse in their trucking career. 92% have experienced at least one incident in their career. That is a astounding number. Women in Trucking did a survey a few years ago, 2021. On theirs, 46% suffered unwanted advances. What was really scary in their survey is 20% of women were threatened with weapons. Weapons. 20% of female drivers were threatened with weapons. 25% of drivers leave their first year due to sexual abuse and sexual harassment. And these aren't just, 25% would be students because it's their first year. So I think from a statistical standpoint, it is a very prevalent issue. Yeah, thank you.
Right. So let's tie that in. I want to, something you just said there. How many so you just mentioned that these incidents of harassment or abuse led to what percentage of women quitting within their first year?
25. Okay,
so the American Trucking Association, who are the biggest promulgators of this idea that there's a shortage of truck drivers in America, which we all know is a lie, but let's just set that aside for a moment. Let's follow their logic, okay? They want to be able to get more truck drivers, and they are, through their research, through their papers, are always talking about getting more truck drivers into the industry from various other groups, right? So typically truck drivers are dudes, typically they're white dudes, right? I'm not big on identity politics, but let's just go with their game. So they want to bring in veterans, women, minority communities, whatever. That's fine. If that's the case, you would think that one of those vectors of getting more drivers in, if there was actually a shortage and they actually gave a shit, they would do something to stop the loss of that 25% from the one group being women, right?
You would think, but no, because their goal isn't to maintain. Their goal is to run them through the mill. They don't make anything. The carriers don't make it. There's no incentive for them to maintain, but there is incentive for them to run them through the mill and have a constant flow.
Right. Yeah. Along with everybody else. Which I'm with you. I find all of this disgusting. And while we're talking about the ATA, and we're going to get to this study we're talking about here soon. They have their own in-house research group called the American Transportation Research Institute. I met them at Matt's. They seem like nice people, but let us not forget who their paymasters are, right?
Mm-hmm. All research can be manipulated depending on the parameters.
Right. Now, the ATRI, I thought they were, whatever. They are who they are. They're the research arm of the ATA. Some of their stuff is interesting. I always sort of took a ambivalent approach to them. But then in July of this year, so a couple months ago, they released this white paper talking about, the changing demographics of trucking and, again, engaging with this question about how to get more people into trucking from various different demographic groups. Okay, fine. So I'm reading this white paper and I'm immediately appalled at two things. They spent a couple of pages talking about they didn't say felons. What was their little weasel word? Like justice system interacted individuals or something?
Right.
uh, yeah, they had this term. Everyone else would say ex-cons, felons, whatever. I'm not against people who've done their time for their crime. Fine, you get out of jail. It's hard to get a job. Sure, try trucking. I'm not going to stop people doing that. But it just says something that's like, hey, we got to go get those guys. That should be a place we put more effort in. And then the second group, and they spent 8 pages of this white paper talking about this, appealing to foster kids who turn 18 and age out of foster care as a demographic that should be headhunted to become truck drivers. Right. And these two things, these two vectors, these two groups tie in to some a study that you and the rest of the ladies and real women in trucking are quite upset about because it was canceled. So I want you to tell me about this study, and I want you to tell me about how this hiring felons thing ties into that story, because this is all very interesting how it mixes together.
It's very interesting. So the FMCSA has what's called a SASH study. It's a sexual assault and sexual harassment study. Now, this is something that's been around for a few years, right? So this started with the Infrastructure Act back in 2021. So when the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act was signed, part of the signing was that they had to establish a board. So the Women in Trucking Advisory Board was established in 2022. So Infrastructure Act came up, WOTAB was established. Drivers from all aspects, Women in Trucking had some drivers on the panel. She Trucking, Real Women in Trucking, we all had drivers. There was drivers from all parts of the industry on this panel. So they come out and actually their recommendations were actually submitted to Congress this year in January. So they get together and they say, we need research, right? Something needs to be done for this. And so there's been some surveys out, there's been some public meetings, there's been multiple requests for information published by FMCSA to get this study up and going. Okay. So basically, the goal of the study was to identify and assess the trends of sexual assault and sexual abuse, right? So they want to support women coming in as truck drivers. They want to expand on women coming in. So they wanted to understand what the actual prevalence was. I don't know why I can't say that today. Of sexual abuse and sexual harassment. And then once that was done, then we could develop countermeasures. We could make policy, outreach, set up ways to support women coming into the industry once we understand the problem. Administrations change. The survey was still, the study, I don't want to say survey, the study was still on. It had all its committee members set up. Funds were already allocated for this. This was a funded, set up study, right? Nothing needed to be done except for the work. And all of a sudden, committee members received this notice that, hey, we're not doing the study anymore. It's done.
And who orchestrated the cancellation of this study that was funded, all set to go, everything's ready to go, all you have to do is just do it and then publish the findings? How did it get canceled, and who was behind that cancellation?
It's been a little vague, except for the administration canceled it, and the only reason they gave was that it does not fit. And let me actually read this out to you the way that so I don't say this incorrectly, because there was actually a wording on this. Michelle Kitchen, she is one of our Real Women in Trucking board members. She was also on that committee, and she sent me a screenshot of this response. Bear with me just a second. Well, I want to say it exactly. The decision to terminate is because the government's priorities have shifted, and this project no longer meets our needs. That was the official statement.
That's pretty milquetoast and not saying very much.
Right? I agree with that. So no longer meets our needs. So when does protecting women no longer meet a need? I mean, I didn't know that protecting women is no longer a priority for anyone in any industry.
Right. Yeah. When they leave it worded so vaguely like that, and when there's this open question, given the sort of import of the question of the reason the study is being conducted, anyways, and the Trump administration and Duffy, Secretary Duffy, to his credit, contra the previous administration, hasn't really said too much about like driver shortage stuff. Duffy's been sort of mostly focused on the safety thing and the English language proficiency thing. I haven't heard him say anything about a driver shortage yet. Maybe he has, maybe I missed it.
With his focus on safety, that is really surprising that the study was canceled, since this was all about safety of the female driver. Now, I did hear a rumor that something was said about it aligning with DEI initiatives. I have not seen that in writing yet, but safety and DEI have nothing to do with each other.
No, they don't. And so, I mean, all right, explain that to me again. I'm confused now. Why would a cancellation of a study that's trying to help this particular group, which is women facing sexual assault, how does that not fit DEI? Like,
does it fit? So I don't think it fits DEI at all. I think that it's far from DEI. I don't see anywhere where it should be tied to. I mean, we all know that DEI initiatives are being cut, right? But how does this tie into DEI? I don't see the correlation.
Right. No, fair. That's why you're here, to answer the questions. Because I mean, I, maybe on the inclusion part, you want to include more women in trucking or something. But like this seems like you say it's more of a safety thing. And then again, tying back to the logic of people like the American Trucking Association, even though we know it's all bogus, if you want to keep more drivers in the industry and you want to attract them, if you want to attract female drivers to trucking, a job that everybody knows is dominated by dudes, where you spend an incredible amount of time by yourself, you're sleeping in truck stops that are full of guys, God knows where they're from, what their manners are like, whether or not they're dangerous. You've got very little in the way of security when you're out on the road by yourself, other than your door locks. The safety of this demographic and trying to attract them into the business, like the cancellation of this makes no sense to me. I have a theory about it, and maybe I can tell you the theory and you can tell me. I'm sure you agree with me, actually.
Yeah, my theory too. I mean, we probably have the same theory, actually.
Right. Well, I think what would happen. So let's see if we're simpatico on this. My theory, as I expressed on Twitter a few days ago, is that this SASH study, if it actually got to do what it's supposed to do, would show what real women in trucking already knows and have already shown, is that the team training model is exploitative. It provides way too many opportunities for harassment and abuse of female drivers at the hands of male trainers. The whole thing sucks. Everything about it sucks. Never mind the abuse, never mind the assault. Team training is a fraudulent way to train truck drivers, and everybody knows it except the government. So if this SASH study goes forward and provides a huge nuclear bomb of, hey, all of these mega carriers getting money from the government for their truck driving schools are now taking women and placing them with rapists and sexual abusers, that's some pretty bad public relations for the mega carriers and for the government who gives them money, isn't it?
Yes, now take that a step farther. You have all that information right there. Now you have the ATA pushing for these felons to saturate the trucking industry. So we are already faced with case after case of drivers being hired with felonies that are of sex crimes, violent crimes. And these convicted felons with a background of these sex crimes are being hired by trucking companies, being made trainers, and then they're assaulting female drivers. Now ATA is pushing to flood the market with felons, and there is no processes in place to protect women from violent sex crime offenders being hired and become trainers.
Oof. This gets back to that ATRI study, or white paper, I should say. Exactly. They have a conflict. If they're paying for a study, or they have a study on their hands that shows we have a problem with sexual assault and sexual abuse between trainers and trainees in the trucking industry, and then on the other hand, we are advocating that people guilty of those same crimes out in the wider world are now being brought into the trucking industry and could become those trainers. Like, it's kind of at loggerheads, isn't it?
Correct. Let's talk about white paper, ATRI. On top of that information that they released, there was an interesting thing that I touched on about a month or so ago. So since my career in trucking, the percentage of women have increased, right? A number of female truck drivers. So we were at about 12%. I heard it got up to 14%. ATRI published in July 15th, actually, I have it pulled up right here on my screen. They published a study saying that females compromise just 4.1%.
I want to let's clarify that, just because you just popped out a number, and I need clarification on this because I've seen both sides and I don't know who to believe.
Neither.
Yeah, traditionally it's roughly 5% female truckers. I've seen this 12 to 14% thing, but then I've also seen people say 12 to 14% is females in all aspects of transportation, working at brokerages, dispatch, accountants, mechanics.
No, so the larger Actually, if you start adding in the other aspects of the industry, dispatchers and so forth, is actually much higher. And I actually had this pulled up. I was writing an article on this, and bear with me just a second while I pull up my statistics. So the percentage of women in the transportation industry in all aspects is much higher than that. So this, so let's see. One of the statistics says dispatchers. Let's see. Overall, women represent about 38.5% with all sectors.
Okay, and how recent is the 12 to 14% in driving roles? Like, how
So
new is that
I
data?
heard that last year, 2023. In 2024, the numbers were much higher, and it really depends on which source you pull it from. Even if you look at women in trucking, and the one they do, if you look at some of the studies done by the other employment per, let's see, who are they? Let's see, you got the WIT index, which is done by women in trucking. That's just based on their carriers. But then you got the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They do one, and then there's another third party that does one as well. And they all have different numbers, but they're all in that 11 to 14 range. So when ATR came out with this 4.1 range, I mean, just a third basically of everybody else, you knew there was something coming. I mean, you just knew because they're already trying to diminish the role of the female truck driver.
Right, that's interesting. Well, one of the things about ATRI, right, and this sort of seeming cooking of the books that they're engaging in, whatever. I'm not accusing them of that. I'm using the word seeming. I don't want to. I don't get in trouble.
So everybody has a way of getting their numbers, right? I mean, they have to have a logical explained pool, right? So WIT index, we know what those are. What's ATRIs? We don't know.
Right. Well, so I asked Steve Shelley about this, who wrote Big Rig, Trucking the Decline of the American Dream. He's like NPR's go-to guy to talk about trucking on whenever they touch on it. He's this sociologist at University of Pennsylvania. He's their guy. I asked Steve about this too, and we were years ago when we were talking about the driver shortage thing, and I'm like, how does what's the ATA's methodology for coming up with this? Because like we all see that it's bogus. Like anybody with anecdotal evidence, laws of economics, they don't do anything to try and keep people around. It's clear that like the shortage never ends. There's always people quitting, coming and going. How are they coming up with this? And Vishali's like, well, they just send around a survey to their members, like how many trucks do you have sitting? How many people could you put in trucks right now? That doesn't tell you anything about market demand. That doesn't tell you the overall capacity of the entire trucking industry, whether it's over or under. That doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't take into account that some carriers have been accused, and I don't know if this is true, but it seems likely, some carriers are accused of overbuying trucks because they get a big discount buying them at scale anyway. And if they have a whole bunch of them parked against the fence not doing anything, that's a tax write-off. And then there's trucking companies who get extra money from their particular state every time they train a new driver. So like if they get somebody, it's just cash for them. So their whole methodology of measuring how they get drivers is self-serving.
Correct. And this is the same thing. So in 2024, the National Transportation Institute did a survey of percentage of student drivers that are women. It was, I think 2022 is like 15%, and they said it was down to 10.7. That poll is the same thing. Working at a college, our percentage is about 30%. And I know a lot of other colleges that their numbers are the same. I know a lot of training institutes that the percentage of women students is over 30%. So how do we get this 10.7? Well, when you have the CDL mills pushing out all these students and you have the influx of the immigrants coming over needing to get their CDLs, that is definitely going to change our numbers.
Right, yeah. And so speaking of our in-sourced labor friends from every corner of the globe, well, no criticism. I'm actually curious, like how many of those groups are women from those groups getting into trucking, or is it merely just dudes? Because
Very small, very small.
because they have more traditional cultures, women stay home, and there's certain, how shall I put this, cultural patriarchal attitudes and practices that would see their own family and community groups frown on women going away by themselves in a truck and then coming home without a male minder to keep an eye on them while they were gone.
So we have all seen the increase in non-domicile CDLs, right? So those non-domicile CDLs, they still have to go through CDL school. I mean, we've had a large influx of patients in my area that went through CDL school.
I don't know that they're necessarily going through a school per se. Maybe they are on paper, but anyway, carry on.
On paper or not, they are still going through a school. So if you take that influx of non-domicile CDLs and you add it into the percentage, I think that's why we're seeing a reduce, because we've seen such a drastic increase with those non-domicile CDL issuances. And I think that's why our percentages are down. I don't think the number of women is down. I just think that our pool of drivers is bigger.
Right. Yeah. And that ties in with our overcapacity problem in trucking we've seen since the sort of, everyone's been waiting for the industry to shake out all the excess capacity since things started slowing down in late 2022 after the COVID demand spike. Yet rates are still in the toilet. There's still trucks everywhere. Well, hundreds of thousands of these non-domiciled CDLs have been issued to people who showed up here yesterday. And now it's only a theory on the part of myself and guys like Shannon from American Truckers United, but I think that was done on purpose. It seems
Agreed.
pretty clear. So actually, that brings me to another question, getting to the non-domiciled thing and where that all really got. I mean, it was already started, but it really took off south of the Biden-Harris 2021 Trucking Action Plan. And in that plan, so I've been asking a lot of my guests this because many of the guests on my show recently took part in giving testimony to that, either in person or via Zoom or in a written format. And, the Trucking Action Plan people, through Secretary Buttigieg and his buddies at McKinsey, are seeking input from everybody about what are the problems in trucking? How can we, make sure the supply chains keep working? What do we got to do? And, they talked to ATA, they talked to David Carell from MIT, Steve Viscelli, Michael Belzer, all these academics, and then a number of different groups, including, I just released it earlier today with Ramon Dillon from the North American Punjabi Trucking Association. And from what I saw on paper, they also talked to these women's groups in trucking. Did they talk to real women in trucking? Did you guys submit to the Trucking Action Plan?
Yes, I do believe we did. We submit to a lot. I myself did the SBA one. But I do believe we did submit to the Trucking Action Plan. We submit to all of them. I'd have to pull up and see what our response was. But yes, we have a lot that goes on through Real Women in Trucking behind the scenes. But so Desiree does not miss any time to put our thoughts in. I would have to pull out what our actual stance was at that time, because that was back in 2021. So I know part of that was the truck parking, and we do a pretty big advocating for truck parking. So I'm sure I can pull that and take a look. That was before me being on the board.
The action plan, again, so many people have told me what they submitted to the Biden administration, and it appears that they ignored everybody and just went with whatever the ATA told them about a supposed shortage of drivers, because that Trucking Action Plan, basically, after that, we see this huge spike in non-domiciled CDLs, way more migrants getting into the business, a whole bunch more money for truck driving schools. And, the market shows us exactly what happened. We've been in a protracted freight recession because we've got way too many trucks out on the road.
Exactly. And that's why when people shout, "Oh, driver shortage," and you're like, "How can there be a driver shortage when drivers that are out there aren't working? They're not moving. Trucks are sitting there because they don't have the freight to move them. How is there a driver shortage? There's a freight shortage." for the number of drivers we have.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm seeing that across a number of places. And then, a good friend of mine is a freight agent for a pretty large company in Canada. And he's like, he's been in the business his entire life, which a career that spans 4 decades. And he's like, I've never seen it this bad, Gordo. It's just, carriers call me and we'll take anything. They don't question the rates. They don't question accessorials. They don't just give it. We need the work because there's nothing going on.
Yep.
The wider economy is in really bad shape, and I think a number of chickens are coming home to roost from 2008, from even before that, just years and decades of bad monetary policy, money printing, dollar devaluation, just administration after administration trying to patch the holes, and sooner or later this ship is going to sink. And I think the trucking industry being a leading indicator of that. Typically when trucking slows down, it slows down before people notice it in the rest of the economy. And
Right.
the more I look into this trucking action plan, the more it seems to me like they were deliberately flooding the market with people in order to cover a number of things up and to reduce costs for shippers in America who, I mean, it's explicit in the very first press release from the trucking action plan. They cite the ATA complaining about having to pay their drivers a premium of 7 to 12% extra, lest they quit and go work for somebody else. Everybody's a capitalist until the price of labor gets bid up.
Right. And if you think about what truck drivers are getting paid now compared to what they were getting paid 20 years ago, I mean, we've taken a pay cut.
Oh yeah, it's been flatlined or just cut down. It's been like that since 2016. There's been like a number of studies showing it. And like just anecdotally, like I remember my dad pulled out a pay stub from when he used to work for this company in Hamilton back in the day called J-Line. And he was, hauling trains out to New Brunswick, coils out, lumber home, running around Quebec and Northern Ontario. And, he would take home $800, $900 in like 1982, 83. I mean, he worked hard for it, but what's $900 in 1983 money worth today? A couple of grand, 3,000, 4,000. Find me an OTR truck driver working for a mega carrier that makes that kind of cake. Like they don't exist.
Exactly. So let's look at it like this. So I see a lot of opinions about this being part of a long game. So I'm going to break down what I hear and some of my own thoughts. So one, veterans. So we've been trying to bring in a lot of veterans. Why isn't the veteran, why isn't that sticking? Because veterans are used to things being done in a certain way. Trucking's a mess. I mean, dispatchers, freight, hold times, and that really conflicts with a veteran's way of, being timely. We want the veterans out here, but we give them chaos when they get here. So we're having a hard time keeping and getting veterans to come out here. Women. So we want women, but yet we're going to give them an unsafe environment. So then we tried immigrants. Right? So immigrants worked until it didn't, obviously. It increased the number of accidents we have. It was very unsafe, not being able to read English. There was a lot of issues with the influx of immigrants. Now we're going to go for the influx of felons. So what's going to happen with that? My stance, and I'm sure you've seen on social media, besides the sexual abuse and sexual harassment of women, is how do we track sex offenders as far as our children are concerned? There are a lot of contract carriers that haul for Walmart, that doesn't have the same hiring standards. So you hire a sex offender who is, after children, and then they're delivering to your local grocery stores and bye-bye Johnny. So how are we going to take care of that? Each thing that they do hurts the trucking industry and the image of the trucking industry. At the same time, all the trucks are coming up into the autonomous features, right? So we have the different levels of autonomy until we reach complete autonomous. Slowly, the trucks are increasing the levels of the autonomous until they total. So a lot of people are saying the end game is to destroy the image of the American truck driver and make autonomy more appealing to the consumer. So a long game, you just start hurting the image until you get what you want and the public is on your side. And that seems like I'm in agreement with that to a certain aspect. It does seem like the end game is to push the autonomous trucks and get rid of the driver.
You're not the first person that said that to me. And I've done a little bit of research into autonomous. I've had a number of guests on who, specialize in researching that stuff. I have an anonymous mole at one of the autonomous system developers. It really does seem like they're doing it because the main feature that the autonomous companies claim to deliver is safety. They're not actually going to save that much money, at least at first, right? Because the autonomous systems cost a lot of money to put on the trucks. They have to be able to build them at scale to compete with a human-driven truck, which is going to take them some time. So there's that. And then they've been very clear about this. You don't just buy an Aurora driver or a Kodiak truck and then that's it. You're done. You're hooked up with Aurora and Kodiak forever because you have to keep getting updates and you have to pay for a subscription. So the truck drivers' wages are being redirected to the autonomous systems companies. They're not getting rid of our wages. Maybe it's less. Maybe this annual subscription to Aurora is only 25 grand a year instead of paying a driver 60, but they're still paying, right? So the cost reductions actually aren't as much as what they're saying. So they have to lean into the safety thing. The problem is that most human drivers are actually pretty safe. And if you look at the statistics of fatal collisions and serious incidents involving big trucks, they were on a downslope to 2016. Truck drivers were getting better. And, despite all of the adversity we faced, despite the retention problem, which was still going, they were just trucking incidents were going down. And since 2016, they've been going back up, back up, back up. 2021, they spike up because now we're dumping a whole bunch of people in the industry who are functionally illiterate in English. So it does seem like, maybe the autonomous companies are doing the long game and getting public opinion on their side to get rid of us by them working with the administration to literally flood the zone with incompetent drivers, to say the least, and then have all of these systems. What's the word I'm looking for? They're like dissolving these systems that would make a better driver and bring a better driver to the market and keep, make our roads safer. Like and again with the SASH thing, that would blow up a method by which they get more drivers on the road who are new people that are less competent, right? It does seem like, from your perspective, from mine, from all the other people I'm talking to, like they're doing this on purpose.
Right. So I'm going to add another part to that. I don't know if you've noticed a transition from long hauls to relays and short hauls. That is part of it because the autonomous trucks don't have the capacity for the long hauls, right? So the industry has slowly been shifting from these long hauls to these relays and these shorter runs. And that all ties into it as well.
Right. So like you mean the sort of mega, truckload carriers, like switching to relay, kind of like the LTL carriers do.
Right. Yep. They're doing that. And then there's a lot more of cross docks popping up and distribution centers that are taking products in and then cross docking, holding, or relaying it in and then relaying, bringing it in and then relaying it to the final destination. So this model, I have watched it slowly change in the last 8 years that I've been out here. And the number of long hauls compared to the relays now is a drastic difference. And you'll hear a lot of drivers complain about that, that the long hauls aren't there anymore.
Yeah, when I interviewed Shannon from American Truckers United earlier this year, he mentioned something similar, although he didn't necessarily attribute it to companies adapting to get ready for the autonomous truck, whenever they get on the road. But it was more about the insourcing of labor where, some companies who exploit recent arrivals in the trucking industry, they sort of do the same thing. You hear these anecdotes about people seeing a truck and like three or four guys get out of it and they're all taking turns driving. Maybe they're training each other. And Shannon was saying that like anything over 2,000 miles, if you're like a sort of family owned smaller trucking company or medium sized trucking company in America, you can't compete with the guys using in-sourced labor. Like they've just got that whole segment of the market on lockdown. They're really far long distance stuff.
Right, right. Well, there's so many components that the transportation industry needs to convert to become fully autonomous. It's not just the labor. There's a lot of different factors outside of the labor, regulatory, our ability to handle the trucks. Sorry, I got a call from and I apologize. So we aren't fully set up to handle it, but it's not just the labor that's going to make the transition. So, changing the way we deliver has a big impact as well. And people don't look, and I think that's the problem. People see this happening and they see this happening and they see this happening, A, B, and C, but they're not tying all those things together.
No, they're not. And I think that's sort of our role here as advocates in the industry is to make those connections that are not immediately apparent to outsiders in trucking. This is kind of like what I do. And I started the podcast with the aim of being able to talk to, there's a lot of academics who've studied the trucking industry for whatever reason, maybe they're just nerds. A couple of them were actually ex-truckers, Michael Belzer and Stephen Burks. And I there was a missing connection between what those guys were doing and then the sort of like wider trucking media and discussion because over and above the stereotype the truckers are too busy, don't have tons of time to read. Who's going to read a 400-page academic treatise on the economics of trucking labor markets, right? Like, I don't know, I have time, I'll do it. So and that's why I started bringing these guys on my show. And I think, having these conversations, connecting those dots and making our connections, the things we see available for everybody else is sort of very important.
Right. And did you see the expansion of the railway that was going to be offering the extended long haul?
Yes.
Okay. I think that plays into it as well. So switching from trucks to train for the long and then taking that percentage of runs off of semis, putting it on railway, and then, switching the trucks.
Point, I sort of see that. I'm a big fan of intermodal freight because like trains are really good and efficient at heavy stuff. There's lots of it and it has to go far away, right? Like they have an efficiency that trucks don't have, right? And so with intermodal stuff, throw something in a box, chuck it on the train, put it, send it down the road. That's fine. I'm also prejudiced against box trailers and freight and refrigerated stuff because of all the time I've lost standing around at docks. So, that's my own personal grudge. The more of that stuff goes on trains, the better. But like to bring it back to the autonomous thing, what a guy I work with, James Year, has been really pushing on something that the autonomous guys have been saying. Again, they only say this to their investors. They don't talk about it in the sort of wider public, is that they're going to try and advertise that their trucks are more fuel efficient and therefore can compete with trains, right? With the really long haul stuff, as you say, they're trying to offer more coast to coast service. And autonomous guys want to come for that too, because to their logic, it's like, well, our autonomous trucks don't have to go to sleep. They can run 24 hours. They only have to stop for maintenance and fuel. And they run a steady 60 miles an hour. They get better fuel mileage, whatever. And perhaps on an individual truck basis, if you're only thinking about it as a truck, maybe it does get better fuel mileage than a human driver. Okay, I'll grant them that. But in order to compete with the rail, you have to be able to take the volume that the rail takes. So if the autonomous truck system manufacturers just end up putting way more trucks on the road to compete with the train on speed because there's no human operator in the truck, Now you just have more trucks on the road, which are less efficient than having all those loads on one train. So they're doing this dirty business where they're comparing efficiency here in sector A with efficiency there in B, and the scales are way off. And when you have a whole raft of these extra autonomous trucks on the road, your claims to being better for the environment are shot out because they cannot compete with the rail on that.
Right. So what's going to happen is the rail is going to do the majority of the long miles. They're going to deliver to the port or wherever they're going to come in. The autonomous trucks are going to come in, pick it up, do the shorter miles that they're more economically advanced for. And then you're going to have your final mile drivers, maybe box trucks, so forth, doing. And will that be autonomous? I don't know. I'd like to see them back around some of the stuff that we see out there. But that's what's going to happen. I mean, that seems to be the setup.
If you take like a purely utilitarian, not emotionally attached, non-trucker perspective to this, that's all good for the economy, right? We're getting stuff moved more efficiently. It costs less. We don't have to pay drivers. Now the human element comes into it. Like, what do you do with the millions of drivers you've just laid off? What do you do with all the people that work at truck stops? There's like a human element to this that nobody has any good answers for yet because nobody really knows.
Who cares? So they're playing the reduced birth, so right now we got the reduced births, right? So that's playing into this. So supposedly our population is supposed to decrease. Then you have all the extra things happening to decrease it. And what are we going to be doing? We're just, COVID was like a test run, and we're just all going to be sitting at home, not being productive. Our nation was built on our productivity and, our free enterprise and our mom and pop shops. And I'd like to see that continue. I would like to see the American truck driver continue. I would love to see an influx of women in this industry. I love this industry. I think it is an amazing opportunity for women. I don't want to see it go to autonomous and rail.
I like it too. And, I can't control the future or what's going to happen, but I can criticize how they're doing it. There's this lady named Karen Levy, and she's a scientist, sociologist person here at Cornell University right near me in Ithaca, New York. Wrote this awesome book in 2022, it came out. Data Driven, Truckers, Technology, and the New Workplace Surveillance. Highly recommended. Everybody should read it. One of the chapters in her book, and she didn't officially title it this, but the idea was called The Slope, right? What do we do with truck drivers between now and full automation, right? Like, what do we do? The whole system seems to be set up on like surveilling them, treating them like children, not paying them enough, and continually abusing them until the robots take over. And that's not good to anybody, right? Because between now and when robots take over, or whatever percentage that they're going to get, let's take that for granted for sake of argument. We can't just keep flooding the zone with people who are incompetent, who get in accidents. We can't keep having women expect to deal with sexual assault and sexual harassment as part of the deal with training to get into the business. We can't keep underpaying people. We can't, we can't just keep treating truckers like garbage. And this is the thing, getting back to the ATA and the ATRI stuff, how they keep going through these different groups. They keep throwing bodies at the problem instead of fixing the problems, right? Like David Carell from MIT, 40% of trucking capacity in America is sitting at any given time. That leads to the perception we need more drivers. And that leads to all these other problems, right? Drivers not getting paid for delays, drivers speeding. Like, a lot of stuff comes back to detention. Fix that. They won't fix it. Just keep throwing bodies at the problem, right? Why do we lose good drivers like me? I've been off the road for 2 years. I got laid off, and I can't get a driving job for the life of me. I'm overqualified, and most of them suck anyway. Instead of trying to keep guys like me around, well, we'll just keep throwing bodies at the problem instead of trying to fix the sexual assault, sexual harassment thing. Who cares? Just keep throwing. We'll just get immigrants to do it instead of women. Like, the answer to these, to our rulers, to the ATA, to the government, is just keep throwing more bodies at the problem until we don't need bodies anymore.
Right. And now it's felons. So our next body that we're throwing at it is felons, which I'm perfectly okay with felons coming in and filling up, but not the violent ones, not the ones with sex crimes. Tax evasion, come on out. Come on out. I'm okay, but violent sex offenders, I am totally not okay with. There is no tracking. I have a huge problem with a transient sex offender with no way to track them or accountability out here. No one's safe in that aspect. And that is a bad plan from any view.
Yep, 100%. All right, so it appears that I have to bounce.
I think we kind of, took a pretty broad approach to today's topic, but
it sure did. And before you go, like, any final thoughts, anything else to say about real women in trucking, what we just talked about? Like, mic is yours.
So the abuse and sexual harassment study from the FMCSA is a very important part for women in trucking. This is something that people should not take lightly. Lately, I mean, saying that it doesn't fit our priorities anymore. This is women's safety. I have started a petition on change.org. I would like to see the community rally behind the initiative. Whether we get the study back or not, the support that's to say that the safety of women is not something that we're going to ignore, right? We don't want to ignore safety. We don't want to ignore the needs of women in any industry, whether it's trucking or it's insurance or it's any industry, right? Safety is important. So if you could take the time to go to change.org and sign the petition, I would greatly appreciate the support. Also, Real Women in Trucking, it's a great advocacy group. Go check them out. Check us out, see what we're about. Join. Become a member, become an advocate. There are so many people that turn their head and don't speak. So if you're somebody who is not afraid to speak up like me or you, we would love to have you on our side.
I will make sure all the links for all of that stuff are down in the show notes. Everyone go check out Real Women in Trucking, sign that change.org petition. And take no crap from our sort of ruling class and people like the American Trucking Association who have this team driving program that's bad for everybody. It's bad for people of the same sex in the truck. You don't get quality training out of it. The whole thing sucks. It's even worse if you're a woman. It's even worse if you're being sexually harassed. All of this stuff is bad. Go check these guys out. Will you guys be back at Matt's again in 2026?
Oh, absolutely. I was there this year. Loved it. Had a great time.
Well, let's catch up. I'll be there selling my book, hopefully. So.
Yeah, I couldn't get everything done in the limited time I was there. I mean, there was just so much going on.
It's a good party.
But it is. I had a great time. So I hung out with, the crew, and it was great. We were out actually in the parking lot this year. So we were out with the trucks. One of our girls, they have a truck that they had entered. So we were out in the parking lot. So
one last thing before we go. Some of the Real Women in Trucking ladies were featured in a documentary film that just got released. Can you tell us about that for like 5 minutes?
Yes, Driver. Nezzy Azumi did a documentary. So Desiree was in the documentary as well as some of the other gals. It is on PBS, so you can click the link for 60 days. It started, I think, Labor Day was the first day of it. It is a raw, in-depth look at the realities of the trucking industry. A must watch. It is getting rave reviews. I have seen some amazing reviews come back from it. Definitely go watch it. Neza did a great job on this documentary. Again, it's called Driver. You can go to driver.film to see it, the information on it. It was filmed a couple years ago. but yes, definitely a must see. We've had a lot of traffic on our website from people who have watched the documentary and said, I had no idea that this existed, you know. So, but it was recorded live. I mean, it was, nothing was staged. It was raw footage, day in the life. So it's very interesting to
Awesome. All right.
watch.
Well, everybody go check that out. I'm going to watch it with my little daughters here who are all about trucks and ladies trucking. So good stuff.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, Gordon, it was great being on the show today. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
the invitation.
absolutely. And I appreciate the work you guys do and sharing your message and these issues with us and for your time and joining me and beating up on the ATA a little bit because they need it. Yeah, way of the road.